Welcome to DisNewsYouKnowUK. My name is Bar and I'm MD Sign Capsules to talk about disability news in the UK. To explore stories and give their opinion. Although there are news outsides out there participating in news, several people and news affects our lives. It's still underreported. And generally, as many of us already know, we are underrepresented in the media. The amount of this podcast is therefore perfect to address the bounds. This is some news from the government UK website. And the headline is Government expands employment support for disabled people. The Department for Work and Pensions has announced a major expansion of its Get Like to Work programme, a new initiative to help sick disabled people into secure jobs. The programme, which is part of a £3.8 billion employment support package, will be rolled out into 15 areas across England. The initiative aims to provide personalised support, including individual coaching, employment specialists and job matching services to over 85,000 people. This comes with a significant rise in economic inactivity due to health in the UK. Need to preface that by saying that's the press release from the government website. Not going to be the whole press release, I'll just give it a bit more from that. He says it's 338 million investment to connect to work. Says localised tailored support for 85,000 people who are sick, disabled or face complex barriers to work in 15 areas across England. It's done a nice, roughly breakdown of cash for certain areas. It says there's up to 71.9 million for central London forward, supporting 68,800 people, up to 47.1 million local London sub-regional group, 35.3 million for South Yorkshire, and 30.7 million for Greater Essex. Look. Yeah, we've said all this before. Tailored support, personalised support. Well, we've heard this is only areas for disabled people, whether it's social care, whether it's employment, youth in the body, and we just hope it's not another, that's 14 years, and before that, where barriers aren't acknowledged and the support is actually support that's tailored to people's needs rather than people being told they can do this and can do that and not being gaslighted, etc. by various trainers and various job coaching groups. And it says especially job coaching groups, well, Pink doesn't see who those providers are and whether they come from DPOs or whether they involve disabled people that actually understand or I could understand a lot of the barriers that said people fear going to the workplace. And also, again, unless they fix access to work, it's pointless pouring more money. I mean, they love to talk about figures and the day. As I've said in virtually every episode, it's like money doesn't fix a problem if you don't know what the problem is and you don't have specific, they have SMART goals, all the rest of it, and all these high-fluting project management terms. But the bottom line is, instead of specifics of what the problem is and tailored responses to those problems, then it's not going to work. And we've seen time and time again that they seem to ignore what the problems are. The only problem they're interested in is the permanent massive bill for benefits and how to get that done, but the tailored solutions involve working with disabled people and employers and building a culture where there's acceptance of some of the barriers and changing the nature of work and changing the nature of jobs. For the work that, look, for anybody, is tied to the skills of the people that they have and building on those skills. And I've said again 1,000 times, when you go in social care, X amount of people that have direct payments and individual budgets to employ their own carers and manage small teams of their own carers, you don't tell me they don't have skills that can't go into the work-based jobs, but at the same time, you have to make the blend between those two systems if they're able to work. If they're not able to do that a lot, I'd argue disabled people with a lot less coaching is I think that you've got coaching people into work, yeah. There's very little coaching for the disabled people that have to manage suddenly overnight. Staff team of their own care staff or external agency staff. And then you're telling them gaslighting that they don't have any employment skills. No, they don't have the ability to do traditional job roles all the time, all the flexibility, because they're, first of all, managing their own care is a full-time job, literally a full-time job, which is unpaid, because the money that they get goes to it's not going to the employees, it's going to the tax department. So it's, you're not going to fix this. And with further gaslighting, you need realistic solutions, and that involves this in disabled people, and that also involves bringing listening to employers about the nature of work in the modern 21st century and what's needed and what isn't needed. I mean, much like I've said about benefits in general, in terms of people with lifelong disabilities, aren't going to change. We all know they aren't going to change despite whatever adults or whoever they are, or whatever provider that comes in to do these sickness benefit tests seems to think they will change overnight, is, they should have permanent access to benefits for those who can't work, and for those from, the people, whoever it was for, it's people I've seen now, they should have permanent PIP. Now, if that's the case, for people who, going back to those who manage their own care, but who have direct payments, individual budgets, for those who obviously are going to need care indefinitely, we know that's not going to change again, despite what social work assessments may try and say. Yeah, what about just providing a basic income salary on top of the salary to pay for the care? And then you almost have to take away the ESA and everything else, keep the pay because it's that of work benefit, and then you're giving them a salary to manage the care. And even that won't be fair, because effectively the only time they're not managing care is when they're asleep. So to me, that would be part of a solution. Although the problem then would be tax, etc., and so forth. And is it fair? You've also got the monthly contributions they pay towards that care, which in some cases, considering them benefits, is extortionate. Or, and others say the system has to, you've got to contribute something towards that, but those costs have gone up and up and up. And maybe it's a case of, all the other subsidies like your council tax subsidies and whatever else, and your mobility and whatever else. Maybe there's a compromise in terms of you give some back to get more on top for the salary that you would get. In that specific instance of employers who manage their own care, and then you give them a flat salary, and then whatever you would take for kind of contributions to the care you take in tax. Although they'd argue that's too less a tax, but when compared to the rest of the working population, but the rest of the working population, if they work for an employer, they get bank holidays, they get statutory 28 days, usually, statutory time off, etc. and so forth, Christmas off, etc. and so forth, and disabled people don't get any time off from being disabled, so swings and roundabouts. I mean, obviously everything comes up my head, but it's, there's got to be some kind of common sense new approach to these things. They go, man, the same old loop, and ignoring the skills that people do have. Anyway, we wait to see what transpires with this new back to work initiative. But, I'm not at my best. So there we have it. The next story comes from the Canary. A new report from the Accessible Transport Policy Commission is calling for an end to the postcode lottery disabled people face with the public transport. The report highlights fragmented governance, outdated frameworks, and lack of integration between different transport modes as key barriers. The Commission is urging policymakers to create a UK-wide disability transport task force and to include disabled people in the decision-making process to ensure a consistent and inclusive transport network. Accessible Transport Policy Commission is part of the National Centre for Accessible Transport (NCAT) and convened by a cross-party group of parliamentarians. It has now launched its first report, Joined Up Policies, Joined Up Journeys, Roadmap and Accessible Transport for the UK and Involved Governments. The report sets out a 5-year roadmap to improve transport accessibility policy and regulation in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Denied access to transport systems that be equitable, consistent, and inclusive by design. Disabled people make 38% fewer journeys than non-disabled people across the UK transport system. And the research has found out that 92% of disabled people face barriers when using at least one mode of transport. Exclusion caused by inaccessible transport prevents disabled people from fully contributing to their talents, skills, and perspectives. It stifles them the ambition of policymakers to build a healthy, prosperous, and successful society because it limits disabled people's access to employment, housing, health, and culture. The organisation's research shows that this has disproportionate impact on disabled people from marginalised and lower socioeconomic backgrounds across the UK. Fragmented governments, outdated frameworks, and fortune policy delivered is causing barriers to transport. Notably, the Commission's report has highlighted postcode luxury. This has created disabled people or creates disabled people. This creates a postcode lottery for disabled people. Crucially, this is the most inconsistent accessible transport standards, ineffective transport regulators, and a lack of integrated education between different transport modes. These systematic changes and the highly devolved nature of the UK transport system means that better coordination between policymakers is vital to enable more equitable and inclusive travel. The report also urges policymakers to bring disabled people whose experience and expertise often overlooked into decision-making processes. Future reforms must embed co-production at all stages. And it goes on. I think we've got the gist there. It's, again, not highlighting anything new. I think probably another episode of Harvard included a story about inaccessible transport. So we just hope, again, the policymakers, i.e. the government, and then individual transport networks, companies, etc. and so forth, finally start to really listen, instead of just paying lip service, and things change, because things really do need to change, because it feels like a lot of things for disabled people feels like it's going backwards instead of forwards. So we'll wait to see what the response is from the powers that be, the government, etc. and so forth, and see what individual transport companies actually, if they themselves have any PR about this report, and, see if stakeholders get together. But again, part of the Equality Act, the duty to consult means that people already should have a seat on the table in terms of access, etc. and so forth. And a greater seat, and, these changes should have been forthcoming, going back 30 years ago, really. So we'll wait and see. The next story comes from Disability News Service, and it says, campaigners call for an urgent action on broken access to work scheme. Hundreds of disabled people and allies have signed an open letter to the Prime Minister urging urgent action to fix the crisis written and broken access to work scheme. The letter, led by Access to Work Collective, highlights the difficulties and burnouts experienced by disabled people who rely on the scheme employment support. In a new open letter to Work Collective, it says disabled people rely on the scheme, are burning out, breaking down and dropping out work. Some have lost their homes, they say. Others have gone ghost losing their lives. The letter is addressed to Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer and copied to Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall and Social Security and Disability Minister Sir Stephen Timms. Access to Work Collective includes more than 3,800 Access to work, recipients, disabled people's organisations, researchers, policymakers, service providers and employers. Evidence collected by Collective shows disabled people are waiting months or even years for assessments, approvals or payments. These delays mean they cannot start new jobs, are forced to leave jobs they love, or have to shut down their own businesses. The Collective points to problems over the last 18 months which have seen cuts and inconsistent decisions on access to work claims, and so reforms were being introduced by the DWP, even as consultations on the future of the scheme, which ended on the 30th of June, was still live. The letter demands a halt to all planned and unofficial cuts, immediate action to clear the backlog of claims, and to fast-track urgent cases, and for Mrs. co-design and overhaul of the scheme with disabled people and others. The letter adds, every day that access to workforce may be people's needs, at the end of the day someone is forced out of the workplace because essential support is caught in delay and uncertainty. So far, more than 800 disabled people and hours of some letter inclusion accessibility consultant forecaster Sani Danda, Catherine Ede, who runs Social Enterprise, M. Scott Workplace Wellbeing, Jacqueline Winstanley, Chief Executive Consultancy, Universal Inclusion, author Kathleen Mayer, Disability Consultant Alice Hasty, who specialises in providing access to work advice, and Inclusion Scotland Chief Executive Heather Friskin. Roll words to the outcome of that. I'm not going to really go into any analysis because I think we've spoken again. Yeah, another one of those issues that we've touched on several times, access to work, and the welcome system that it is. And at this point, just propose your opinion, kind of as cynical as I am. Well, is it by design? Because you can't really have this many issues for so long, consistency, probably for the entire year of the time to the budget, and really start to think that it's unintentional. And, is really the aim to get people into work and to stay in work? And when you look at what's happening outside in the ecosystem, outside of that ecosystem of work, you've got, social care quotes, benefit quotes. You've got a number, but that's a few years or so. You've got to move more disabled people going back into care homes rather than living in their own homes and employing their own staff and directing them on care where it's possible. And I get that there's various people that care for their needs, care homes are essential. I'm saying not what I'm saying is that there's many disabled people who used to have direct payments and their own care who are finding that they're being kind of, that's an avenue that's that open to them as such, and they're being, just say, feels if they're being encouraged to kind of go into group homes rather than stay in their own home. And obviously there's external political issues to that, such as lack of accessible housing and then, etc. and so forth, which, you could argue maybe that's part of it, I don't know, but it's wrong at the end of the day. And, you get political rhetoric pieces I put over their heads and, they don't want to work, there's too many people of managed, etc. and so forth. And when they try and go into work, you've got a system that's completely, utterly broken. And doesn't seem to be being fixed anytime soon. I mean, the years and years of delays, months and months of delays and access to payments. You're relying on that for staff, for equipment, etc., so forth. And you're already undergone in terms of in 91% of cases, I imagine that employers kind of, they're nervous about employing disabled people. You've got the additional need of all this accessibility, and then you're not even getting payments on time for your staff, the equipment. I imagine that also involves payments that you would go towards paying towards equipment. So you're basically putting people in a precarious position, and then you're punishing them when they try to go back on benefits. And it seems like a whole system where you're just being gaslit all the time. And, like I said, many times before, needs scrapping and starting again. attention is really what the attention is, then you go back to the drawing board. You search about involved disabled people. Yes, disabled people have to be involved, but employers have to be involved as well. And honest conversations have to happen as to the nature of work in the modern society and everything that entails, because with the rise of AI, etc., and so forth, and unemployment for everybody generally, regardless of disabled or there's an impairment or health condition there. It's precarious for everybody right now. Everyone's struggling, and it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. And the nature of work and what we expect from work and what's fair remuneration for that work, it's an honest conversation, and that needs to include education and health, and needs to include, schools and what we teach in schools and university and nature university, and what employers need from employees going into the workplace, starting off, because there's been mismatch, regardless of disability, right from the off, in terms of, how many people are going to university now coming out in thousands and thousands of debt, which is only set to rise, and then they can't get a job. What's that about? Because, and then you've had, employers, unions or representatives, CBI, whatever it is, for years and years keep saying that the needs of employers are not being met by modern day school leavers and university graduates, etc. Well, obviously it's a broken system all round then, so it seems like this is, systematic across the board, and it doesn't serve anyone really to not fix it. I know, there's probably all the agendas are for, I'm not going to go there, but it's, in the end, you need the people to be productive, to keep society going, and unless you have a healthy workforce and a fulfilled workforce, then, your country's not going to thrive. It's as simple as that. And it's not that simple, but in essence, it's what you need. So all these kind of initiatives that seem to happen, they seem to be driving people further and further, regardless of health or disability, and even regardless of class, because it's certainly as a working class, the middle class is almost evaporated now as a thing, because economically they're null and void. That's 15 years if it's eviscerated the middle classes in terms of an economic improvement. So it's getting really precarious, and so I think big changes are needed, and political support is needed to rebuild this country. And it's not just the rhetoric that we say at the moment from the right. It's all very well, coming up with those same excuses, but it really, isn't the reality. You've got conversations, and it's been years and years in the making from political policies from the left and the right that just don't work. I've said it before, I say it again. It's the same political thought, but it's been recycled for the past 40, 50 years, and it's going to take new thinking to be forward. It's not a left and right thing anymore. It's new political thoughts, new ideas. Anyway, I know Nick Barnell's story comes from The Guardian, and the Hector, this high-profile figure, speaks out on barriers for disabled people. Music mogul Sir Robin Miller, who's blind, has used his platform to speak out about the ongoing barriers disabled people face. In a recent interview, he recounted being denied access to a concert seat because he couldn't provide a proof of disability. He stressed the need for institutions and companies to be more open to recruiting and retaining talented disabled employees, citing the slow pace of progress goes into the big employment gap. The article goes on to say, pop mogul Sir Robin Miller is a man you'd expect to struggle with access in the music industry. In the glitters and career that spans decades, he has worked alongside some of the most celebrated names in British music, star dated Boy George, and cast legends such as the Rolling Stones among his A-list friends. But in a recent struggle to get a ticket for a concert, there was nothing his profile could solve. Instead, He's a deeply status disabled person that caused him difficulty. Milito is the antidote. A music venue refused to sell him a ticket for an accessible seat unless he could provide proof of disability. Miller, who's registered blind as a teenager before losing his sight entirely in his 30s, said, "I told them, oh, okay, I'll get my name to photograph me walking down the corridor and smashing straight into the wall at the end. All that do. At 73, Miller spent a lot of time confronting social ignorance about disability and confounding assumptions about the limits of his usefulness. All the while carrying out a career in the music business as a producer and labourer." Says the author, it's the chair of Scope. Yeah, I mean, he talks about his career, etc. and so forth, but, again, you've seen another instance of, inaccessibility. It's a new story before. We'll talk about access. I've said that was public transport. This is access to, venues, etc. and so forth. And again, he shows it doesn't matter how high profile a disabled person you are, profile, whatever, just make any difference. And if it's open, if you're a disabled person, that's how people see you. So many, a few episodes ago, we were talking about accessibility to transport and the fact that you've had two peers in the last 20 years who've, consistently been treated poorly on public transport, and Tanya Gray, he's only, I think it was last year, they tried to, there's an article where Graham Nash had to call off a train and onto the platform, and it's just, again, it's like what we just said about things come round and round and spiral and to be going headlong into successful future, and it seems to be going not back to the future but back to the past. So really hope things start to change, and these things are things of the past, but more and more we see all of these instances, like less of these instances. And as I've said before, 30 years of the DDA, and so we've got to before the DDA, which is the irony of all, and it's a sad irony, but we've got to keep fighting collectively together to push things forward. And that's enough for this edition. Thanks for listening. See you again soon.